Intermittent fasting's darkest secret. Do you ever wonder what happens inside your body if you just stop eating? Is it healthy to stop eating? If so, how long should it be for? By the time we get to the end of this video, we'll have answered these questions.
Have you heard of intermittent fasting? And what is intermittent fasting's darkest secret? Hi, welcome back to my channel. I'm Dr. Eric Westman, and I review and debunk nutritional misinformation online. In this video, we're going to hear Dr. Mike Hansen, an internist, talk about intermittent fasting and see what he thinks. Be sure to wait till the end of the video to hear my final thoughts. So always consider the source, and Dr. Mike Hansen, though I've never met him, I think has a reasonable biography or curriculum vitae to listen, and the intermittent fasting concept can have lots of different definitions, which isn't quite given enough exposure or emphasis here. What are you eating, to me, matters, not just the timing. So as we go through this, see if he's clear on what you should be eating at these different times. And my approach is to start with a low-carb keto kind of diet, and then if you want to eat lots of times during the day or just once a day, that's fine with me. I don't make people do intermittent fasting. Before we get started on today's video, I wanted to personally invite you to join me in the next 3-week Keto Made Simple program, which is opening for enrollment on May 1st. I call it Keto Made Simple because it's exactly that. You don't have to calculate macros, you don't need to measure ketones, you don't have to weigh and measure your food, and you don't need to do any fasting. You'll learn the exact same proven method that I use with my patients. This is the last time the program will include 3 weeks of support with me and my team, so join the waitlist now to guarantee your spot. See the link in the description.
There may not be many things we know for sure in medicine, except for two. One is that laughter is the best medicine. And the second thing, chronic diseases that are not infectious or genetic in origin, they're a result of insulin resistance. That's when the cells of your body become less responsive to the insulin that circulates around in your bloodstream. So what does your pancreas do? It says, oh, okay, I guess I better make more insulin, which means I have to work harder. Damn. And so it revs up its insulin production, insulin blood levels become higher, but too much of this over time leads to those medical conditions that I just mentioned.
I like this approach. So that easy explanation of insulin resistance didn't come naturally or easily to the prior generation of doctors who were told that insulin resistance was a problem inside these cells, and it wasn't that the insulin was causing insulin resistance. That got into the practice because insulin couldn't be measured in the blood cells until long after practice patterns using insulin was already in place. So you would never want to give more insulin to somebody if the insulin was already high. So if you go to your doctor, please ask for an insulin level. It could be fasting, could be even random throughout the day. If it's super high, the last thing you need is more insulin, right?
Yes, insulin resistance leads to higher blood pressure, also higher triglycerides, higher cholesterol levels, and of course, prediabetes and then diabetes for type 2 diabetes, that is. Insulin resistance is a result of eating processed food. It's really this simple. Processed food has lots of added sugar, it's deprived of its fiber, especially the insoluble fiber, and this leads to insulin resistance over time.
Well, so I don't think it's just the processed food. Just to be a bit of expanding things here, you could develop type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance by just eating fruit or other tons of carbs in other forms, although processed food, ultra-processed food has a higher consumption rate now, and I learned recently about 50% of the food consumed is ultra-processed food in the US, which is kind of a disturbing thought. But so that's right, it's the carbohydrate, sugar-containing food causing insulin resistance.
Not all calories are created equal. 2,000 calories from avocados, broccoli, kale, spinach, quinoa, salmon, almonds is not the same as 2,000 calories from pizza, donuts, hamburgers, Oreos, soda, and French fries. Absolutely not the same. Now you can guess which side will improve insulin resistance and which side will worsen it. Unprocessed food versus highly processed food. This is often why caloric restriction diets often fail after 2 months. The processed foods throw the hunger hormones out of whack, and not only that, but when you're not eating the unprocessed foods on this side right here, that's less fiber and that's not going to keep you feeling full as longer. So this ends up not being a real solution because it's not sustainable. So what about intermittent fasting? Well, instead of restricting calories, you're restricting the time that you're eating.
Yeah, so this is good. I'm not sure where Dr. Hansen got that nutritional information, but it's spot on. And the emphasis on the ultra-processed food, I wish it was more nuanced or more explicitly saying sugar and starch, but that if you hear ultra-processed food, in my mind, I'm hearing sugars and starches, plus all the other additives, but mainly when it comes to blood glucose rise and insulin rise, it's sugars and starches.
It's a less painful way of revving up the same metabolic processes of caloric restriction, except that your leptin levels don't get too low for too long. We don't want you looking like this. So back to this picture, instead of restricting calories, we're restricting the time that we're eating, and we're allowing for these metabolic processes to still happen. And because it's intermittent, you're not going to have as severe of a plummet of those leptin levels. It's more like this. Also, in these metabolic processes, ketones are generated, which is the exact same thing that happens when you eat a very low-carb diet, aka the ketogenic diet. But this process right here is why we have a medical term, and it's called starvation ketoacidosis. In other words, fasting acidosis. This is what happens when ketone levels become too high in the blood, and it makes the blood pH more acidic. So whether you're doing intermittent fasting or a ketogenic diet, either way, these metabolic processes are occurring, and you are generating ketones like beta-hydroxybutyrate. But as long as those ketone levels are low, it's okay. It's when they're taken to the extreme is when you run into danger.
Yeah, so I'm not quite sure why you mentioned ketoacidosis. It won't occur if you make insulin inside, I guess, to make it more interesting.
And you're certainly not going to get into dangerous levels of ketones in the blood if you're fasting for, let's say, 16 hours a day. In fact, there's several studies showing that low levels of ketones in the blood have health benefits. We're talking about weight loss, improved blood glucose control, decreased levels of inflammation, better stress tolerance, anti-aging effects, living longer, improvements in memory, improvements in neurological conditions, decreased rates of heart disease, decreased rates of cardiovascular disease, even decreasing cancer risk. So all of this as a result of having low levels of ketones in the blood. But interestingly enough, all of these things that you see here can also be accomplished by eating unprocessed food. So this is what happens, either one, when you don't have insulin resistance and you keep those insulin levels low.
Well, so I'm going to disagree there. No, I don't think you can get the ketones by eating all of those other foods, but you can keep the insulin low. Agreed.
There's different ways of doing intermittent fasting. My personal favorite and the one that I recommend the most is doing early time-restricted feeding, aka time-restricted eating. It's the most common, it's simple, and it's practical. Just set a window of when you can eat. So for example, I'm not going to eat any food after 8 p.m. and then I'll start eating at noon the next day. Then between noon and 8 p.m., you can eat as much as you want, but you should really focus on eating unprocessed food. You're going to have way more success if you eat unprocessed foods because that's going to get the insulin levels down, improve that insulin sensitivity, but also to balance out those hunger hormones.
Before we get to the sugar, yeah, so the time in which you eat has several ideas behind it. One is to allow your body to be burning fat. That's called ketosis or nutritional ketosis. And you get all sorts of health benefits from that. What you eat, though, matters a lot. Because what I've seen in the studies that allow for lots of carbs when you do eat is that people are hungry during the rest of the day. And my teaching has been if you're hungry, you should eat something. Don't white knuckle through this intermittent fasting time period if it's not natural from within. So many people who do a low-carb, keto, or carnivore diet just find they're less hungry. They can go for much of the day without eating. And I say follow that. Follow that hunger suppression or the absence of urge to eat, and that's fine. It's not going to happen automatically if you're going to be eating lots of processed foods, in this case, or even foods with carbohydrates. Of course, there's some people that don't get that sort of hunger response from carbs, and those people are probably not watching this video because they're not seeking help for their situation.
General recommendation is no more than 25 grams, but of course, the less added sugar you eat per day, the better.
So I'm sensing here a couple language nuances or memes that are going around now. Is the ultra-processed food or processed food is kind of the whipping boy at the moment without regard to really saying what it is. And here added sugars is, out there as a, we want to watch out for added sugars. That is misleading for a lot of people who really need the ultimate low, under 20 total carbs or less per day. You want to look at the total carbs and even the carbs that are within the food, not just the added sugars. If you look at the total carbs, it's going to be stronger than if you're just looking at added sugars.
Intermittent fasting by itself will promote fat burning. Eating unprocessed food by itself will promote fat burning. When you combine the two, you're going to turbocharge that process.
So let's just look, what does this mean? What is unprocessed food? And I think this is a problem in the hoopla about telling people to just eat unprocessed food. Show me a study where they randomize people to eat unprocessed or processed food and look at outcomes, because how it plays out in someone's mind, what does it mean to be processed, is just as important as the science. So if you teach someone to do a low carb diet, especially give them a handout and here are the foods you can have, I know it works. It's been studied over and over and over. So how this plays out into the real world hasn't really been adequately studied. If you just tell someone to watch out for processed foods, is that really going to be beneficial? I don't know. I don't think so.
And if you want to take things to an even higher fat burning level, keep the carbs lower and lower. So if you want to burn fat, one way to do it would be intermittent fasting. Another way to do it would be to go on a low carb or a very low carb diet. That's what the ketogenic diet is. A third way to do it is to eat unprocessed food, because unprocessed food naturally is low in sugar. And then the fourth way to shed fat is through exercise.
Well, so I like this video. I like his approach, and I see that he's trying to, well, it's kind of like my End Your Carb Confusion book, where we have you take a quiz and it helps you sort your metabolism into different categories. And so that's basically what he's doing here, is that you may not need a keto diet if you don't have a metabolism that needs it. You might be able to just do intermittent fasting without regard to the food that you're having. Well, it should be unprocessed, whatever that means. And then the exercise component here, I agree, is a different audience. Most people who come to me can't exercise. And so the approach I use matched to their metabolism, their metabolic needs, and where they want to go, reversing diabetes, obesity. And many of my patients can't exercise. They're in wheelchairs, they have knee pain. So what I teach will work even without exercise. Here, I don't want the impression given that you have to do all of these different things, but I like this matching of the metabolism with these different approaches.
And this is similar to when people go on caloric restriction diets. But the problem with calorie restriction is, for one, they're usually not sustainable. And two, the types of calories that you eat absolutely matter. A fair question to ask is, do you even need to intermittently fast in the first place? And this right here is intermittent fasting's darkest secret. The reason is right here, because you can generate ketones, decrease insulin resistance, and get all of those great health benefits if you avoid eating processed food, especially if you keep the carbohydrates low, especially the sugar, but also the bad carbohydrates in terms of the bad starch. It's all about getting insulin levels down and improving insulin sensitivity in your body. It's not that there's anything wrong with intermittent fasting. I actually do it myself. It's just that you don't actually need to do it if you're just eating unprocessed food. But if you want to maximize the health benefits, you can do intermittent fasting on top of eating unprocessed food, and you're going to be extremely healthy from a metabolic standpoint. But what about women in intermittent fasting?
So before we get to the women part, basically that ketosis picture that he's showing is not achievable if you're eating too many carbs, But I can see the style that he has is not leading with, everyone has to do keto, and because that is a message that nobody wants to hear, and I don't think needs to be said either. But if you need keto, it's there, is kind of his approach. I like that as a general, well-person sort of video approach that talks about the sugars and refined starches and trying to fine-tune how to eat those foods still, as a vestige of sometimes even sugar and carb addiction. You have to be open to that idea. But so far, I think this has been a great sort of summary for those who don't have to lose hundreds of pounds or reverse type 2 diabetes, have some serious metabolic issue like that. Well, I really like his style and his approach, and he's coming at it from talking to an audience of people who don't necessarily need the metabolic benefits of keto kind of diet, or carnivore diet for that matter. The idea of intermittent fasting is a good one. You don't have to eat 3, 4, 5 times a day. I mean, do you fill up your gas tank of your car, fuel your car up 5 times a day when you're just driving around town? So when your fat gas tank is full, that's your adipose tissue fat store, you have plenty of energy. You don't need to keep eating. Intermittent fasting, I find, is a useful construct for behavioral change when I'm dealing with someone who is at a plateau because they're just in the habit of eating. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, they haven't broken the frequent consumption of food, even though they have food already on their body because of the lifestyle, the palatability, the family situation. I've always been told I need breakfast. It's the most important food. I still hear these sort of habit eating things. Intermittent fasting is a great idea to bring in to say, well, if you eat just one meal a day or just breakfast and dinner, lunch and dinner, you're really doing intermittent fasting. And that's a great idea. Have you heard of it? So I use that as a behavioral tool for some people who, you can even overconsume on a carnivore diet and not lose weight. If you get taught by the unlimited consumption, meaning I'm going to just keep eating and eating and eating. So for most people on a carnivore diet, even the amount you eat goes down, and that's how you get the metabolic benefits from it. So in general, I thought this was a great video targeted toward a general population. And if you like this video, please like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. Look for new content on Wednesdays and Fridays. If you enjoyed this video, consider joining our YouTube membership for early access and exclusive live Q&As with me. Just click the join button below or support us with a PayPal in the description.